Alright, so today we're talking about Nikon Z6II, and I didn't say much about this camera on this channel because, I don't know, I used it professionally, and I think that the target of this channel, it's not necessarily professional photographers, but for those of you who want a full frame camera that does it all, stay with me because there are other things that I want to talk about this camera, and spoiler alert, I kind of love it. Videography here, welcome back to the channel, and like I said, today we're talking about this beautiful mirrorless camera, the Nikon Z6II or Z6II, and there are a lot of things that I want to talk about, but I'm gonna try to keep it short. I jotted down everything I want to talk about because I believe that everyone knows what the camera can do, and I use it professionally for all my work since I think it was June or May last year. So I think I have an idea of how this camera works and how it functions and how can please you if you're shooting the same kind of stuff that I do or different things. So let's get into and dive into the nitty-gritty of this camera. First and foremost, this is a full frame camera, a 24 megapixel full frame camera. And in terms of quality, those 24 megapixels are plenty for all kinds of applications. I shot weddings, I shot product photography, I also shot portraits and street photography and landscapes with it. So it's pretty much everything you desire from a 24 megapixel camera. Now, this is not pioneering, it's not revolutionary, it's just a 24 megapixel sensor that you'll probably encounter less and less these days because people are going and manufacturers are going toward higher megapixel count, and that is unfortunate because I believe that the resolving power of the 24 megapixel sensors is amazing, and the image quality as well as the low light capabilities and color rendition and everything else. I do love the way this one does it. Now, this 24 megapixel sensor is an stabilized sensor. It has in-body image stabilization, which means the sensor is basically stranded on a gimbal inside the camera that moves ups and down and avoid those jittering and shaking situations when you need to, let's say, shoot lower shutter speeds or you need to shoot video, and it will help you with the b-roll and handhelding the camera without having much of an issue. It's not perfect, but it's better than the Sony a7 III, for example, that I used in the past. Also, I think it's better than the X-T4 as well. I didn't encounter any kind of issues. I am not pretty good of shooting handheld footage, and I'm talking about videos. And that is my problem, not the camera's problem. But when I'm shooting photos, down to, let's say, 1/8 of a second, 1/15 of a second, never had an issue even with long lenses like 50 or 85. So the in-body image stabilization, the IBIS, is great in this camera, and that is a plus. Another thing that I didn't know, though I was pretty used with the D750, which was my last DSLR camera that I used, the low light situations on these sensors on Nikon in general are pretty good, and the D750 was amazing. This one is even better, probably 2-3 times better in my opinion in terms of low light situations and high ISO situations. I shot 6400, 12800, and the images are usable. Even 25600 is usable if you need it, but for sure 6400 is pretty clean, not much of a grain or noise. The colors are maintained well, and I really appreciate to have a sensor capable of shooting in low light, because when I'm shooting events, I don't really enjoy shooting flash all the time. If I need it, I will, but most of the time I'm trying to keep everything natural and let's say more real to what our eyes are seeing, especially when I'm telling the story. So that is great for the Z6II or Z6II. Now, another thing, and that is not necessarily an amazing thing, I've seen better, but the battery life in this camera is not not something to brag for, but not something bad. I usually get around 750 to 800 photos on my style of shooting, and it's a good amount if you are thinking about events. I'm around 2000 photos, 1600 to 2000 photos most of the time, so 2 batteries I think will do the job. Maybe 3 to make sure that everything is fine, or just keep a charger with you and charge it all the time. But I think the battery life, it's not bad. And if you are a spray and pray shooter, maybe you need more batteries. If you're shooting for the composition and you're taking time with your framing and all that stuff, probably 2 batteries will be enough, maybe 3 batteries, and that's not a huge investment. Now, the elephant in the room is obviously the autofocus, and there are a lot of people talking about the autofocus in this cameras. The Z6, the first iteration of this camera, was pretty bad, especially when it was released, and then they came up with firmware updates, which I really appreciate, because any manufacturer that listens to their customers and they come up with firmware updates to improve or fix bugs or stuff that they need to be done, and people are signaling, that is great, and thank you Nikon for that. Back with what I was saying, the Z6, the first iteration, wasn't amazing in autofocus. They improved it through firmware update, and that's great, but the camera is still lacking the capabilities of the Z6II, and this one is a better camera in autofocus. It's not perfect, definitely not perfect, and it has a little bit of a problem to sometimes finding faces or tracking them. Sometimes it's hard to understand why it's not focusing, even if there is nothing in front of it and there is a lot of contrast. So I think another firmware update will help with this and maybe get the camera a little bit closer to the Z9. I know that the processor inside, the X-Speed processor, is not as good as the one in the Z9, which is a new generation, and it's more powerful and it has more resolving power when it comes to tracking and autofocus, speed and all that stuff. So this one, I believe, can be improved a little bit more, but not much. I am happy with the autofocus when it comes to photos. I never had a problem. I shot birds in flight, I shot like I said, events, and never had a problem. You just have to deal with it and learn how to use the autofocus to your liking and to give you exactly what you need. For example, I'm using one of these buttons, the FN buttons right here in front, to track the subject, and that works very well. I'm just pressing the button, the tracking box appears, I'm pressing the AF on button and the camera starts tracking. Never missed a shot, and I promise you, I'm not lying, I never missed a shot using the tracking. Maybe I'm too good, maybe the camera is better than I was thinking of, but still the AF is good enough. I would say very close to an 8.59 in my opinion, compared to Sony and probably Canon. I didn't get to play with Canons that much, but I have no problem with this AF. Now, when it comes to video, that's a different story. People are cringing because this camera, like I said, is not tracking faces the way it should, and it finds faces in places where there is none. I actually, I don't know if you remember, but I shot a video where the camera was trying to autofocus. It was because behind me was something that looked like a face, or the shape of light that looked like a face. Also, on the walls, I have pictures of my family that I shot, and not only my family, but pictures that I shot in the past and printed. And if I have my daughter or my wife's face somewhere on the wall, it's gonna find that face instead of staying on me, though it is a pretty good, let's say, depth of field, pretty good distance between me and the wall. I don't know, it is what it is. We have to deal with it and maybe change your lifestyle or change the way you're shooting if you want to shoot with this camera, because that's what it is. The Z9 is different, and if you want something with high performance, a pretty high price, but much better camera than this one. Maybe you should go with that. If you want something that will help you get through the day, then get the Z6II, even the Z6 if you are willing to put up with some quirks. And also the autofocus speed and the autofocus tracking needed to be tweaked, and I did it, so now it tracks me well. The one that films me is the ZFC, and it has the same settings, and if you can tell, it tracks me very well, so I don't have any kind of problem. The same autofocus in this one is on that one, so the same settings, so that's how it works. Now another thing, oh yeah, another thing is the XQD. So this camera shoots on 2 card slots, comparing to the Z6, which shoots on only one. This one has 2 card slots. One is an XQD, very fast card, and the other one is an UHS 2 card. So it's a pretty fast camera in terms of buffering if you're shooting a lot of photos. I don't remember exactly how many on the buffer, but I think the JPEGs are infinite. You can shoot as many as the card can take. Because I'm not spraying and praying, I don't mind and don't care about these things, but for sure the card slot is fast enough for shooting 4K 60, 4K 30, and also to give you that leeway on when you're shooting birds in flight or sports or stuff like that, that you won't have any kind of issues with the buffer. Maybe you're gonna have issues in terms of the processor speed, but definitely not the card buffer, especially if you're riding on the XQD and doing a backup on the UHS 2 card. And the last thing is the fact that this camera has an amazing build, and if you are looking at cameras that can provide you an amazing grip as well as a great build, this is a weather sealed body made out of metal, and the grip is probably the best grip I've ever encountered on a mirrorless camera. And I'm talking about A7 III, A7R III, 2, 4, and I'm not sure how the A7 IV is, but this one feels so nice in hand, and I am very pleased with how it feels when you're holding the camera. DS lenses like this 35mm f1.8s are not small. Actually this one is pretty hefty. Now I have the filters on top, but it's still pretty hefty, and it feels very solid with the body. So in conclusion, this camera is not a slouch in my opinion. You can have this camera for pretty much any kind of situations except sports maybe and birds in flight. Maybe you should think of the Z9 if you're doing that on a daily basis. But other than that, if you're shooting events, if you're shooting portraits, if you're shooting landscapes, if you are shooting street photography, if you are shooting product stuff, this is a camera that will never fail you. Or if you're thinking about failing in terms of AF and other, situations like that, that might be our fault as well, not necessarily the cameras. So I still believe that this camera is a great buy in 2022, especially if you are into the Nikon ecosystem, if you're shooting DSLR still, and if you want to switch to mirrorless, this is a great option. You can use the FTZ adapter to adapt all your f-mount lenses like I do with the long lenses that I have, and I never had an issue, especially for the things that I'm shooting. Again, for birds in flight and sports and fast action cars and stuff like that, maybe you should think of the Z9, because you might missing more images that you are ready to, and that is something to think about. The only backup that I have is the Nikon ZFC that I'm shooting my video on right now, and another camera that I love and we talked about in the past. And if you want to watch that video, just check it right here. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Give it a thumbs up. Subscribe to the channel if you enjoy these kind of videos, and stay focused, my friends. I will definitely see you in a bit.